So, folks, let's have a chinwag about the old protein. So, a couple of things first of all. I want to introduce you to the base principle of protein, and those are these. Protein in our diet, in the right balance, of course, with our carbohydrates, our fats, with plenty of vitamins and minerals incorporated, they provide repair and growth. So I really want you to consider this from the PE perspective. It's really important that when we get fitter, for example, we do some training, we'll do a PE lesson, this sort of getting fitter process, what we sometimes call adaptation, the body's literally changing and it's repairing and growing stronger. Therefore, protein is essential to that. But the other point we want to make about protein as well, it's really important from a recovery perspective when we think about sports science, performance, physical education, because if we are going to go into our PE lesson, I don't know, we're going to lift some weights, or we're going to sprint, or we're going to do something that's really anaerobic and high intensity, it's the protein in our diet and the protein that we carry which is ultimately going to lead to the repair of any tissue that becomes kind of, especially muscle tissue that is used under very sort of stressful conditions in your PE lesson, for example, and again, any growth and any adaptation, any fitness that develops. The other thing we want to say here is that occasionally, it's very rare by the way, small amounts of protein under certain conditions will be used for energy, but I want to be crystal clear here that protein is not the preferred, is not an ideal energy source for human cells. We will use protein for energy during periods of starvation, okay, where the body will literally consume its own muscle tissue, for example, and ultimately its organs. So that might be something to do with like an eating disorder, for example, might lead to something like that. The other point we might want to consider is if we're looking at very, very extreme endurance sports. You know, if we're doing sort of like ultra endurance, ultra marathons, it's possible that our body will begin to consume its own sort of muscle tissue in the form of protein because it doesn't have a source of carbohydrates or fats to actually process. So I just want to mention that. Now, with all that sort of stuff passed, where do we get our protein from? Well, a couple of things to stress. Very good sources of protein are things like fish, are things like meat, are things like pulses. I'm talking lentils, I'm talking nuts, and we also get it from things like dairy. I'm also going to throw in there eggs, which I'm never sure whether to refer to eggs as dairy. I suppose they're not, are they? So this is where we're deriving our protein from. And furthermore, I just want to stress before we look at what proteins are in detail, wrong button I pressed there, what I want to do here, let me press the right button, is I just want to stress the proportion of our diet or our energy intake which should be from protein. So I'm just going to remind you that previously we said that 60 to 65% of our energy intake would be carbohydrate. I'm just going to write carbs there, okay? Now I'm going to suggest here that a further 10 to 15% of our energy intake, our dietary intake, will be protein. And that's of course going to leave this other chunk which we'll come back to in other tutorials. You probably already realize that's going to be fats making up the remainder of that component. So our protein, in essence, is the smaller of the three macronutrients, or from our carbohydrates, our protein, our lipids. Proteins is contributing the least in terms of its overall component of the diet. Now, that doesn't mean it's not important. It means it performs a different function, a different role. Now, I'm going to get a little bit creative at this part of the tutorial. I want you to start to think about what proteins are. Now, I'm going to suggest that this here is an amino acid. I'm going to suggest that this here, and forgive my horrid drawing by the way, is an amino acid. I'm going to suggest that this here is an amino acid. Now you might wonder, what are all these amino acids? What's James banging on about here? Here's another amino acid, and I'll just put one more in. What shape shall I make it? Let's make it a kind of a, what colour I used? This colour. Let's make it some kind of diamond shape. Now I should stress, I am purely making sort of a depiction of proteins here. Proteins don't actually look kind of like mathematical shapes, as I've just stressed. But the point I want to make is that each one of these elements is an amino acid. And our protein, the protein that we eat in, let's say, a piece of chicken or a piece of salmon or in pulses, they are made up of amino acids. And as you see, they're chained together to form a protein. So what we've got here is a protein. And let's just say we've got this protein from maybe from the white of an egg. So this is the protein that is contained within the white of an egg. And I'm just making this stuff up as a depiction, right? Each of these different elements is an amino acid. Now, what happens is during our digestion, and let's look at the process of digestion. Now, very important with proteins, we realize that a lot of digestion occurs in the stomach, okay? But ultimately, we need to break this chain of amino acids down. Now, what do we break it down into? Well, we break it down into this. We break it down into this. We break it down into, I'm trying to get the right colours and shapes again. They're meant to look the same. You get the idea. We break it down into this. We break it down into this. And we break it down into this. Now, these amino acids, these are all amino acids, and they are not chained together. So we take a chained protein, we digest it to break the amino acids into individual pieces, okay, into individual acids, amino acids. And as a result of that, we can then absorb these amino acids in the small intestine. And if you're not sure what the small intestine is, I really encourage you to look at our tutorials on this. It will help you to understand that. But of course, it's part of the gut. But we take these amino acids in and we absorb them in the small intestine. So if we've been doing a PE lesson and we've been doing, I don't know, some interval training because it's part of a health and fitness unit, and we've worked really, really hard and we've strengthened, we go and have a protein shake, or we have a protein bar, or we eat a piece of salmon, a piece of chicken, some egg. After we've done that, ultimately what your body's going to do is take that protein, break it down into amino acids. Now it's going to pass it into the blood, and that happens at the small intestine. Now the question is, what happens next? Well, what happens next is those amino acids are passed to the cells. Now, I don't want to jump ahead to your GCSE Biology. Let's just say they go to the cells, but I'm going to tell you these amino acids go to the ribosomes in your cells. I'm not going to test you really on this word, just for awareness really. And what your body will do is the following. It will take those amino acids, let's say this one, and it will take 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 this one, and what your body will do is it will chain those amino acids back together, but in a different order. And as a result, it will make what's called a human protein. Now, you cannot eat human proteins. You can only take on board proteins from things like meat, fish, etc. You can break them down into amino acids and then rebuild them into human-specific proteins in your cells. Now, what's going to happen next is that this new human protein here, it's going to be sent to do its job. It might be that this is now going to be sent to be a muscle filament to make the bicep muscle in your right arm stronger, because that's what you worked on in PE. Or it might be sent, and proteins do other jobs, it might be sent and it might form an enzyme. It might be sent and it might do another job. It might, for example, become a hormone. And all of these things, including many others for that matter, they are completely reliant on your body's capacity to take in protein, digest it and break it down into amino acids, which are soluble, can be absorbed in the small intestine, take them to the cells, ribosomes, the small parts of cells, and then build those back up to be human proteins, and then build them, for example, into muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue, let's say for argument's sake, makes you fitter and stronger. So folks, the point I want to make is protein is crucial, especially in relation to your performance and your efforts and your physical output in your PE lessons. Try to remember to eat/drink protein after big effort. Okay, so if you go into your PE lesson and you do a really big effort, and maybe you're playing football in your PE lesson and you put like lots of energy, you come out all sweaty and red, this sort of thing. It's really important then to eat or drink protein after that effort. Why? Because we then need to build this growth and repair tissue, and we do that by taking on proteins, broken down into amino acids, and built back up in the cells into human proteins like muscle tissue. Thank you.